Policing that's a different discussion, probably outside the scope of the podcast here, but
Hey, everything's within the scope.
everything's within the scope. I like that. But it's a different ball game from when I started, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed putting bad people in jail.
Hi, and welcome to the Off-Grid Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick, and today I'm here with the founder of Vyper Kydex, Mr. Phillip Nichols.
Howdy.
How are you doing today?
Live and kicking, brother.
Man, thank you so much for inviting me to your shop.
Yeah.
I really want to know your origin story.
The origin story.
Your hero story. How did you get from where you were to making custom holsters and having your own Kydex shop?
Long and winding road.
Let's do it.
Honestly, Patrick, starting out when I was younger, just building stuff with my dad was always cool to me, and learning to work with my hands, as it were. I always found that fascinating for some reason or another. And I'm not a craftsman by any stretch of the imagination, but I enjoy building things, and I enjoy building things for people. As a passion for firearms and the outdoors developed in my life, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world that a guy could come to me and say, hey, I need a holster, okay? And that actually started with a custom holster that I needed. I had a particular firearm with a particular set of attachments that nobody was making a holster for in the normal space.
What firearm was it?
That's actually a 1911 with an add-on rail.
Okay.
That was drilled and tapped into the dust cover. Okay. So this was not a railed 1911. This was a standard 1911 that I had an aftermarket rail put on. And so I kind of started researching, like, how do I do this? Because nobody made one. I ended up making a holster for it.
How many years ago was this?
This was in 2011.
Okay.
And a couple weeks went by. The holster was kind of cool. It was neat. Started learning to do some other stuff. I made some other holsters for other guns that I had at the time. And then one of my buddies saw it. And you know how that conversation is. Like, oh, you made that? Can you make me one? So that's kind of where the concept for Vyper got started. I was making holsters just to make holsters for my buddies.
So you were self-taught. Where did you learn how to manipulate Kydex?
YouTube University.
Nice.
YouTube University, man. Everything that you ever want to do is on YouTube now, right?
Absolutely.
If we want to build a 69 Camaro, it's on YouTube. If you want to learn how to do plumbing, it's on YouTube. If you want to, whatever you want to learn to do, you don't have to go to college for anymore. You can learn to weld on YouTube, okay?
People who go to college are learning from YouTube.
Yeah, precisely.
Yep.
So that kind of led into one thing, and one thing led into another, and started making some holsters on the weekends for my buddies. And then in around, 2016 or so, I said, I can make this a side hustle from my regular job. And I did. Got a logo established, named the company Vyper Kydex, started kind of building a presence on social media.
Before you go on, Vyper Kydex, it's a cool name.
Okay.
You got a cool logo. How did you get there? How did you get to Vyper Kydex?
The easiest way to explain this is that, we all think about the Gadsden flag with the snake, don't tread on me. But I wanted a way to modernize that. I wanted something that was cleaner.
Okay.
I'm not a guy that goes out looking for a lot of fights, but if you mess with me, I'm going to bite you. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That's kind of my mindset. I'm not going to mess with you.
So you're the Vyper.
I'm the Vyper.
You're the Vyper. I like that.
Vyper. But if you, I've always looked at it and said, hey, look, I don't want no trouble with nobody. But if you want it, you're going to get it. And I took that imagery from the Gadsden flag. That's what that is meant to represent. Don't tread on me. I'm I'm dangerous. I want no quarrel with you. But if we got to bite, we got to bite. And so I said, how can we clean this up? How can we modernize this? And take some inspiration from that classic part of our history and bring it into the 2000s. So I got that logo established, and that's kind of where that came about. And I decided to change the I to a Y.
Okay.
Give us a little bit of uniqueness.
Yeah. Edgy.
So yeah, sure, call it edgy. You know, just something different, something that wasn't, that didn't draw out as much. Again, that didn't lean as much on that traditional design look.
Okay.
You know. And then so after establishing that, we got a LLC shortly after that, and I started the business as a part-time venture. And then in 2022, I retired from the police department here and went full-time.
So you started this while you were a law enforcement officer.
Yes.
Did you make any holsters for the people you were working with then?
Oh, all the time, yeah.
Yeah?
All the time.
So you got to actually test this in the field and see what worked and what didn't.
Yeah, and so one of the big things that, I'm glad you asked about that. There's something that I always thought was really cool about my former profession that I got to do with my business that a lot of other guys don't get to do. I made radio holsters, flashlight holsters, handcuff holsters, all that kind of stuff. I actually wore that gear on duty for years before ever releasing it to the public. So I knew after being out in the streets as long as I was and rolling around in the stuff that I had made, I was like, this is tough enough. I know it's going to work. Because, you know, when you're in a uniform profession, when gear fails, it can be really, really bad, especially at inopportune moments. And so when I got to kind of test my ideas out and figure out my processes, I was able to use myself as a guinea pig. And I learned what worked and what didn't. And as I started noticing, like, this stuff's really strong. This is really good. It retains really well. I'm not losing gear in a fight. I'm not worried about this tearing up or something coming apart. That's when I knew, like, my stuff's good enough. And so, yeah, I made a ton of stuff for guys at the department that I worked at, and now I'm a vendor for them as well. So,
looking back, and I don't want to put you on the spot here.
Sure.
But what were some of the first issues that cropped up when you were just getting started and testing your gear?
Usually, and you'll find this pretty common in most Kydex guys, it's learning to get retention right.
Okay.
On a pistol, that's actually the easy part. So when you start doing handcuffs and radios and flashlights, things like that, that's where retention is difficult.
And you're talking about the way gear fits in?
Correct.
And gets
how secure it is.
Snugly held by the
That's right.
Kydex?
That's right. So a pistol is really easy for the most part if it's not light bearing. Because you've got this nice trigger guard, this flat surface on one end, and a divot behind it essentially, where that trigger is, that you can really make snap. With light bearing holsters, now your retention point is different because you don't have a trigger guard to depend on. Now you're asking the light to hold that gun in a holster, so that has to be mastered, right? And there's little idiosyncrasies with those kinds of things. So when you look at kind of those common issues, once you kind of get some of those things sorted out, and a lot of that's just experience, and what is your forming process? How much heat are you applying? How much pressure are you applying? When you move into a different kind of forming, which is what I use now, is vacuum forming, that doesn't become as big of an issue because now you're using CNC machined molds that produce a consistent product and give you the right retention every time.
So somebody listening to this for the first time might not have a clue what you're referring to when you're saying forming. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes. So when you first start out, a lot of times most guys will go through the same process that I did, and that's what we call foam forming, in which you put a hot piece of Kydex and the mold, whatever that may be, whether it's an actual firearm that has been prepped, or if it's a mold firearm that usually takes some prep work as well, And that foam compresses the Kydex around the gun. And that will create the essentially reverse impression. I guess we'd call it reverse. It's you have to think backwards, right? Because we need to be able to draw that firearm or that piece of equipment out of the holster. So you're creating an impression in a thermoforming plastic that takes heat and then forms around an object. And when you do that on both sides and you apply tension between the two sides of the Kydex, that holster will open up and flex to allow that piece of gear in and out. And so that's generally when you get it like a snap on a holster, that's what it's doing. And so when you're trying to create retention, you're looking for, again, a place like the trigger guard on a pistol is the absolute best place if it's not light bearing. There's not really any other places on most pistols that can create retention, not reliably. And so when you start out with that foam process, it teaches you a lot about what do my molds need to look like? How am I making clearance for your control surfaces?
Explain that.
So your slide lock, slide release.
Yep.
Right? All right, that's got to be clearanced in and out of the holster.
Okay.
All right, because if you just press it against, if you take the Kydex and just press it against the side of the gun, well, it's gonna form around that slide lock, slide release, whichever one you prefer.
And then
Some
it's
guys
going to be stuck in there.
Then it's just going to be stuck in there because there's no channel for it to get out. So when you're molding, you have to build channels for all of your control surfaces and essentially a way for the gun to escape that retention. Once you master that in foam, transferring that to a vacuum form process is easy peasy.
Okay.
Because now you're running CNC machine molds that have already taken that into account. So you don't have to add pieces of wood and things like that like we used to have to do. In 2011, to put this in perspective for you, people were still making paddles for outside the waistband holsters out of Kydex. All right. Now we use injection molded glass filled nylon. 1,000 times stronger, number one. This Kydex is only meant to flex a particular type of way, you see. It's not meant to do certain things. It has its, just like any material, it has its limitations. Okay? You'll find this, one way you can compare this to something is that a steel wheel on a car will bend when it takes a very hard impact, but an aluminum wheel will crack and break on the same impact. Okay? Because steel has a different type of what we call elastic and plastic deformation reference points. Okay?
Okay.
Certain materials will bend, certain materials will break.
Yep.
At certain levels of force. A Kydex paddle, for example, will only take a certain amount because it is a thermoform plastic of deformation before it just gives up. And have you ever bent a piece of plastic and saw it turn white?
Yeah.
That's the material giving up.
Okay.
That's what that is. So once you figure out how to mold a gun and you're clearing all these channels and you're getting that holster dialed in and the draw like really good, but also it really retains the pistol well, then you start to figure out how can we make this stronger? Because in a gunfight, God knows what's going to happen. You may find yourself on the ground. You might find yourself rolling down the side of a hill. Who knows? So when we're talking about carrying a life-saving device like a firearm, that holster's construction is utterly important. The most important thing on the planet. So I overbuild my holsters just a little bit. And so once you learn those processes through that foam process and then you transfer them into faster and easier things, you have an understanding of, okay, where's the retention at? How strong is said retention? Are there ways that we can adjust it and refine that for the perfect draw on a holster, for the perfect draw on a pair of handcuffs, for making sure that my radio, if I'm a police officer, which is my most important piece of equipment on the planet, is not going to fall out when I'm chasing a suspect. You start to kind of figure out how all that works, and you dial in those processes, and you just get progressively better. It's no different than playing an instrument. It's a progressive thing that as you do it longer, you get better and better and better. And it's interesting in the fact that there's always somebody coming out with some newfangled process. But one way or another, what matters is how the holster works. And what's the functionality level of that holster.
You mentioned the difficulty of retention after putting a tack light on. So one, are you a fan of tack lights?
I don't run a gun
Firearms
without it.
Okay.
Yep.
And then two, if that's the case, what can you do to mitigate that retention issue?
So there are points on the light that we figured out over the years where a mold is inset. And you just imagine a flat surface, and then there's a little dip. Well, that little dip causes the Kydex to kind of sit down in there, right? And part of the light, generally one of the connectors for the rail system on most pistols, modern pistols at least, will sit right against that little dip. All right.
So that's got to be a real challenge then, because there's so many different lights. They're coming out with new lights all the time.
Every day.
And so many firearms, so many handguns to put those lights on.
Yes.
That's, how do you keep up with that?
You don't. There's something in this industry that I talk about this with the guys all the time. I have friends in this industry who I lean on for advice, for help. They have a customer that needs the product that I have, and I have customers that need the product they have, because maybe they do some models that I don't. Because the fact of the matter is you're never going to have all the pistols. You're just not. You're never going to have all the molds. You have guys that are carrying everything from World War II 25 ACPs in Kydex all the way up to Desert Eagles. And I kid you not, as silly as that sounds, I know guys who are carrying Desert Eagles in Kydex. Okay? When you look at the breadth and scope of the number of firearms that we have available to us now, from vintage to right this moment, and what SHOT Show's in a couple months, in
January, yep.
Expect 30 to 40 new pistols at SHOT Show every year.
Yeah, yep.
Okay? They came out with 38 new pistols. I say they, the major manufacturers across our general industry. I think it was 38 new pistols last year. You're never going to keep up with all that. But what do we have? We have standards. We have the Honda Civics, the Toyota Corollas, the Silverados, right? You have those workhorse vehicles of the gun world. Glock 19s, the M&P compacts, the Glock 43, 43X series, etc. Guns that are going to sell every day because they have a, we'll use the word timeless appeal to them. A 1911, I make holsters for 1911s. That gun has a timeless appeal to it. Doesn't matter what age you are. It's a cool piece. Whether you've got a vintage World War II piece that your great-granddad or granddad brought back, or whether you've got a brand new Nighthawk, it's a cool gun. All right? The Glock 19, probably the best-selling carry gun of all time. I'll literally sell them every single day of my life. You're always going to have standards. And then you find new models that come out. Smith & Wesson released the Bodyguard 2.0 recently. It's a 380. I got the mold for that as soon as it hit the market. That's going to be a gun that people like. That's going to be a gun that's popular for different reasons with different demographics. So you find that you'll have those standards, and you can always carry those. And even years down the road after a gun's introduction, you'll still be selling holsters for that.
I've seen some that try to be an all-purpose omni holster, for the lack of a better term, where they claim you can just stick anything in there. Is that something you've tried? How do you feel about that?
Not possible. Not possible. And again, we use cars as an example. You can't ask a Honda Civic to go up the side of a mountain. All right? Or you can't ask a Honda Civic to go to the Dakar Rally. Okay? It's just not going to do it. All right? Is it a great street car? Sure. Guys can build the heck out of those things, shoot, run 400 horsepower, and they're great. But it's not going to go over sand unless you do something really crazy with the suspension. All right? So you generally tend to find it in that realm, because there's a lot of people out there who say, oh yeah, I got a universal holster. I don't need a holster. And about the time that they start really training, they start figuring out that universal holster doesn't really hold the M&P and the Glock and the 1911 that they own.
Have you seen that happen in real world situations?
Yeah.
When was the worst you've ever encountered that?
I was at one of our local ranges, and there was a guy there, and he had 2 or 3 different pistols, and he was just putting them in essentially what they called a nylon kind of bag holster.
Mm-hmm.
And it just got to the point where he was trying to shoot 2 or 3 different pistols and trying to holster and unholster and practice from concealment, and I applaud him for his efforts. But about the time that he missed the draw on one, because that holster wasn't built to actually secure the firearm, it's just like a sleeve.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of came tumbling out. And this is a live firearm on a range. And it just kind of came tumbling out onto the rocks in front of him. Nearly pointed in me and my buddy's general direction. And
Didn't go off, did it?
Thankfully, no.
Oof.
And look, most modern firearms are pretty drop safe.
Mm-hmm.
Most. But is that really a risk we want to take out there?
No. No.
As responsible firearms owners, the last thing we want to have happen is somebody or ourselves get hurt because we did something stupid and avoidable with a piece of gear. That's why we have the firearm safety rules. So, when you look at those kinds of things, you need to understand that there is no one solution. There's just not. Different products exist for different reasons. Different holster manufacturers exist because their holster has a particular style and level of functionality that people like. My company exists because I have a particular style and a particular level of functionality that people like. If you ask of a product more than it's intended to do and it fails, you can't blame the product. That product is built for a reason. An AR mag carrier generally is not going to fit an AK mag. Most likely. Right?
Be weird if it did.
Be weird if it did. Because this is a different, totally different shape. Totally different round. So I generally tend to look at things in the sense of, okay, you got a lot of people out there, and most guys, and I hesitate to be mean about it, but they're being lazy. And you just got
That's not being mean.
You got to tell the truth about this stuff.
Sometimes the truth hurts.
Sometimes it's not pleasant. Don't be lazy with your gear. If it's not one of my holsters, that's fine. But dear Lord, buy a purpose-made holster for that firearm. When you're carrying something that you're dependent on to protect you and your family's lives, it's a pretty serious issue in my book. If you are not putting a few extra bucks towards something that's purpose-built for that thing, you're making a mistake. That's just the way it is. There is no other way around that.
I completely agree with you, man. You're really passionate about firearms. How did that happen? Where did that?
Thank my dad.
That passion come from?
Thank my dad. I started shooting the .22 and .410 when I was probably about 6 years old, and just going to the range. I really didn't start hunting until I got older. You know, I've always enjoyed bird hunting. My grandfather and my dad, both bird hunters. My uncle, my cousins, we just enjoy upland bird hunting, dove and pheasant and things like that, quail. And I probably developed a passion for shooting in general because I found it just fun to be out there on the range. And that's shooting everything from 22s and 410s when I was young to, I probably shot the 12 gauge first time when I was somewhere between 11 and 13 years old, somewhere around there. Started shooting clays and skeet with Dad. And then as I got a little bit older, got kind of into bird hunting more and skeet shooting more. Really had fun doing that when I was in high school. Dad and I used to go shoot skeet almost every weekend. Seems like 3 weekends a month, feels like. And we've always loved fishing, just kind of had a general passion for the outdoors.
Sure.
But once I got into my 20s and I was able to carry a gun, I was 25 years old when I got my CWP. And so I've always enjoyed shooting. I've always enjoyed hunting. But then in my 20s is kind of when I got into, man, I want to go train.
Okay.
I want to learn to do some cool guy stuff.
Cool
right?
guy stuff. Yep.
Okay.
Everybody gets hooked at some point.
Everybody gets hooked on that at some point, don't they?
They do. They do.
So somewhere around my mid-20s, I was living by myself, of course, in my own apartment. I moved out when I was 18. And I was like, man, I probably should have a pistol around. And I kind of got into shooting pistols with a couple of my buddies on the weekends too. Man, from there it's been an addiction.
What was your first pistol?
It's sitting right over there.
Ah.
You want me to grab it?
Yeah, go grab it.
That's it. Kimber Tactical 2, 1911, 45. Aluminum frame, steel slide. If you can't tell, she's been carried. I carried that gun. That was the gun I qualified for my concealed weapons permit with at 25.
I was going to say it kind of has a distressed finish going on.
Every tool that's been used should. People ask me all the time, they say, hey, aren't you worried about scratches on your gun? Gun's no different than a hammer. It's meant for a job. You get scratches on it, you gonna worry about that hammer face when you start nailing together a deck? Nope. Every single one of these marks are training scars.
So have you deviated from this?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Yes. So, again, I've always loved the 1911. I was a cop for 15 years. As I developed that passion for pistols in my 20s and enjoying shooting and starting to get into some kind of tactical and defensive training with that, that's kind of what started pushing me towards the law enforcement. Because I didn't enter my law enforcement career until I was 27 years old.
That was going to be my next question.
I was a late bloomer when it came to that. I was not responsible enough when I was 21.
I don't think any 21-year-old can legitimately claim to be.
Not many. So as I kind of got into that and kind of got more into the tactical side of things and the carry side of things, I became a cop at 27, and that's really where I started actually, what I say, is actually learning to shoot a pistol. Because a Glock, for example, more of a double action style trigger pull, that's where you really learn trigger control. And so at that point, I started getting into the double stack 9mm. And my carry's kind of evolved since then. You're not going to often find me carrying my 1911s these days. I generally prefer, especially with the bullet technology that we have available to us now, I generally prefer a double stack 9mm like a Glock 19 size gun. You get more capacity. You're carrying an extra mag on you. That's a lot of rounds. Mm-hmm. So better capability to deal with extra threats, multiple attackers. The bullet technology on the 9mm is great. A lot of people, when I grew up in the 80s, we all believed that 45 and 357 were that was rounds. That was the combat rounds, right? Now you don't have to have that. You really don't. the advances in ballistics and bullet technology, especially for on the pistol sides of things, is just ridiculous. And so after, kind of after some time with the Glock, I started being a convert to a little bit more capacity from the 45 to the 9.
You never want to run out of rounds.
No, that's a bad thing. It's a bad thing in a gunfight. So, I did. I made some adjustments, and I think that's a pretty natural evolution for a lot of people, at least at my age, because I kind of straddle a lot of, we were talking earlier, and I kind of straddle a lot of time periods. I grew up being mentored by a lot of guys who, at the time, if you were carrying a pistol seriously, there was nothing else to carry but the 1911. Most of the departments, the police departments, were carrying the 1911. The military was still using the 1911. And then the Beretta came along, and that kind of changed things on the military side stuff. Then the police departments kind of followed suit. Double stack, 9mm. Still a big, heavy gun, though, right? And now, you look at that, and we've got stuff like the Poly 80s, which I love. You know why? It's a 1911 grip angle on a Glock system. Because a lot of people have problems with the Glock grip.
Okay.
All right, so you'll find yourself really driving those wrists. Now, we always want to lock our wrists when we're shooting. And I tell people all the time, look, we've figured out that doing this, and you can see that my arms are shaking from the tension.
Yeah.
How I've got my elbows locked.
It's not very sustainable.
Well, we want to ease off that, right? Now what have we got? We got a shock absorber. We got a spring. We got a suspension system. Don't we?
More support.
Yeah, and better support too, because we're built to be this way. So we're working with biomechanics and ergonomics here. Okay. So on the 1911, the grip angle is more natural for your hand. You'll find that those sights kind of fall into place for most people. And now that we've figured out we can relax these shoulders, we can relax those elbows, and we're still getting great recoil control. All right, because we've learned about hand pressure and wrist structure. With the Glock, you find that you'll see people physically do this. You see my wrist rotate forward? Because the way the grip angle is, that front sight wants to sit higher naturally. So in order to have equal height, equal light on the sights, rear and front, they push that sight down on the Glock. Okay? Something like the Poly 80 frames, and man, there's so much legislation going on with that stuff right now that we can't even get into that. But
that's a big old pile of spaghetti right there.
Pile of spaghetti, brother. Okay? But that grip angle on the 1911 translated to a modern polymer Glock frame, essentially, because it's a Glock Gen 3 frame, or internals. Levels it all out. But now we've got recoil control, we've got comfort, we've got strength, we've got a good base for our shooting system, because this all has to work together as a system down to your feet. Everything from the top of your head down to your feet is working as a system. Whether you're swinging a shotgun on a skeet range, or whether you're in a combat shooting situation with a pistol.
So you're in your 20s, you're getting into cool guy shooting. When were you like, you know what? I want to be a police officer.
Oh, I never thought I'd be a police officer. I was a musician. I was playing in bands on the weekends and having fun. But when you're doing that and you start to get somewhere around your mid-20s, you start figuring out that there's not a lot of life down that road. There's not insurance, there's not benefits, there's not a retirement.
At least you had the foresight then to look down that road and say,
yeah,
maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe not all the way down this road.
Right. And look, I'm a traditional guy. I wanted to have a house, I wanted to have a family, and I had a friend of mine. He is deceased. His name is William Kinney. And William was a sheriff's deputy. His daughter and my sister grew up together. And so William just kind of knew me. Our families knew each other. And he was a customer of mine at the music store that I was working at. And he came in one day, and I don't know why, but he said, you'd make a really good cop. And I said, All right, wait, what? No.
Never heard that before.
Never heard that before. Okay, now I had hair past my shoulders at this time. Okay?
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'll have to show you pictures
I
sometime.
want to see that.
And
We'll cut that into the thumbnail of
yeah,
this.
maybe I'll send you one. You can cut it into the thumbnail. Boy, that'd be better than Joe Rogan's thumbnails. And so he looked at me square in the face, Patrick, and he said, "Be a really good cop." And it did not process with me. So, again, I probably had a few great passions in my life. One of those was martial arts growing up. And it's just something I've always carried with me. I think that has informed my attitude. We talked about the logo earlier. It's informed my look. I don't want none, but if it's going to happen, bro, it's going to happen.
Which martial art?
Mainly karate.
Okay.
Karate and judo.
Oh, nice.
So I grew up doing that. And I think it just always gave me the mindset of, like, look, bro, we want to avoid this if we can, but if we got to go, it's go time. I've just never been afraid of anything like that. And then he said that to me, and I was going like, no. And I thought about it, and he called me the next day. He said, "You should give it some thought." And I was 27 years old, realized I needed to do something with myself, as it were. Put in an application, and off I went.
No kidding, just
Yeah.
like that, huh?
Yep. And wrote it out for 15 years. 15 years before I decided you have to do 25 to get full retirement. But we're vested in the state of South Carolina after a period of 5 years.
Okay.
So people say, "Man, you look awful young to retire." I'm like, well, I retired from the job. I'm not retired. But yeah, never have minded fighting. I don't like bullies. Hate them, as a matter of fact. And I never have minded telling them, "Look, you need to quit." So I guess that's what he saw in me. And I spent 15 years on the road doing exactly that. Telling people that were being bullies
Just
to shut up and get in
cracking
the back
down
of
on
my
the
car.
nonsense, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm real proud of that. Policing that's a different discussion. Probably outside the scope of the podcast here, but
Hey, everything's within the scope.
everything's within
Everything's
the scope.
within the
I
scope.
like that. But it's a different ball game from when I started, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed putting bad people in jail. A lot of guys will say, "Oh, I got into policing because I wanted to help people." I didn't want to help people. I wanted to put bad people that needed to be behind bars.
Is that something you saw a lot of in your area where you were growing up?
No, I grew up in this neighborhood right here. Moved back to it. Grew up in a great neighborhood. Never was in a high crime area as a kid. How do I put this into perspective? I've been a lot of places. I've never traveled out of country. Never traveled out of state very much, except for one or two places. But I've been a lot of places here. And I think probably growing up the way that I did and seeing some of the things that I did in my 20s through some of my other adventures prior to being a law enforcement officer, just kind of I had some interesting experiences. Not all of them were pleasant. And so maybe that played into it a little bit. I'm not real sure exactly when you say, where did that come from? I don't know. I just don't like people that are bad people.
I mean, that just could be something baked into the cake, of your the Vyper mentality.
I think it is. I think you probably hit on something there. Wearing a uniform is not something that everybody consciously chooses at first. Some people don't know that they should be a cop. Some people don't know that they should be in the military. They get in it and it's all of a sudden like, this is what I wanted all my life. This is awesome. Some people know from day one. I have a very close friend of mine One of those guys that he started when he was 21. He's still in the Army National Guard now, but he was active duty Army prior. That guy, from the womb, was never going to be out of a uniform. It's what is baked in him. For me, I think I just didn't know it till later.
Nothing wrong with that.
No. I had some things that, tell people all the time, maybe I had some things to get out of me before that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe that's it.
You've been there.
Maybe it's baked in. And
You've been there.
I think it is. It's an integral part of people that want to go out there and do the job. I've helped a lot of old ladies across the street, Patrick.
Well,
But
you're a Viper and a gentleman.
And the gentleman. But I've put a lot of bad dudes in jail too.
Right on.
For me, that's way more rewarding. Can't explain it. That's what I wanted to do.
So, what does the future hold in store? Got any big plans coming down the road for Vyper Kydex?
One that I can't reveal yet.
Really?
Yep.
Can you give us a hint?
An expansion.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
All right.
Working on it. This is going to be a slow process.
Okay.
But man, is it going to be cool. Super, super stoked about that. As to other things, we're always adding new models. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
I got in $2,000 worth of molds a couple weeks ago.
Is one of them a PDP?
Not yet. Not yet. But, but
I've been barking up that tree
I
now
know,
for a while.
I know. So you're not the only guy.
Okay.
You know who else is a Walther fan that you know?
It's got to be Matt.
It's got to be Matthew
Matt
Gillenwater.
Gillenwater. Yep.
And, interestingly, there are a couple Walthers out there on the market that are kind of staying steady. So we're always adding models. I'm also doing some cool stuff with other product that I'm designing, not guns, but product for Vyper, accessory products
Okay.
that are going to help you take your carry game and just your EDC stuff kind of to the next level. One thing that I've always focused on as a company is not just being a holster company. I want to build other products because Kydex, again, it has its limitations. But man, can you do a lot of cool stuff with it. You've seen my Overlander.
Mm-hmm.
Simple concepts that help guys kind of get where they need to be on an everyday carry basis. I want to build more products for that too. So I always have like, okay, man, what is it that I needed when I was on duty? That. I'm going to build it. And there's not a lot of guys out there doing that. They're making great holsters, I'm sure. But they're not stretching beyond that. And so I'm trying to do more than that. I'm trying to find new and inventive ways to use the material. And then, like I said, the aforementioned expansion. I'm super stoked about that. It's going to take some time to get done.
What's the time frame on that?
You're the third person I've told about it. So
Really?
welcome to the Vyper World podcast watchers.
Nice. Nice.
You're the third person.
Exclusive.
Very exclusive. Time frame. 6 months or better.
Okay.
6 months or better, at least. I think that's going to be, it's a big project. It's way bigger than anything else I've taken on.
That's exciting.
It is. It's, I want to let it out so bad, dude. I just want to tell everybody, but you know.
Well, you can always come back on when we
man.
get closer to it.
I can't wait. I'd love to come back on. I want to tell you that while we're here on camera, I want to tell you, how much I appreciate you asking me to do this.
It's entirely my pleasure, man.
Yeah.
Seriously.
It's so cool to be associated with so many cool guys that, from the outdoor and firearm industries. And that, I think that drives a lot of what I do. It's not just about making money, man. I get to hang out with cool dudes on the weekend and go shoot and go fish and go hunt.
I'm honored you think I'm a cool dude to hang out with.
Yeah, you have a cool hat.
Just appreciate that, man.
So, yeah, love it. And that's a big part of what Vyper is, how can we build the industry? We're going to build the company if we help keep building the industry. How can we promote freedom? That's one of my biggest mission statements. If we promote freedom in the United States and we hold on to the rights that are innate within us, those rights are not given to us by the government.
I think that's a message that resonates with a lot of folks right now.
Yep. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights were written to restrain the government, not to tell you what you can and can't do. Tell the government what they can and can't do. How can we continue to build that freedom? Be good Americans, productive Americans. How can we build the industry, the firearms industry? How can we innovate? If I can be a small part of that, and I get to hang out with guys and camp with guys on the weekend that like guns and fishing and cars, then I'm happy.
Man, I think you're on a roll, mission accomplished, and really excited to see what comes out in the future. And
Thank you.
I really appreciate you having me over and letting me see your awesome shop and shooting the breeze with me for a little bit.
I mean, you'll have to come back and film a segment sometime. We'll make holsters together.
Absolutely.
I'll teach you how to do it.
That would be fantastic.
We can do that. I can teach you in a day.
All right. Game on. We'll make this an annual tradition.
Right.
Whenever
Yes.
CanCon's going on,
Yes.
let's do it.
I like that.
Let's fucking do it.
I love it.
Awesome. Any do you want to let anybody know where they can find your products, where they can find you on social media? Do you have anything you want to put out there?
VyperKydex.com, VyperKydex.com, VyperKydex.com. My Instagram is my most active social, and that's just at Vyper Kydex. No hashtags, no underscores, nothing like crazy like that. Just at Vyper Kydex with a Y. If you remember that, we're good.
Sounds good, man.
And that's where I announce anything, like any new models that I drop. All that stuff gets put on there. So
Perfect.
And there's a couple people on Instagram too that are integrated with me that have discount codes for my stuff on my website. I would take advantage of those.
Nice.
It's a really good discount.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yep. Thank you.
Appreciate you, brother.